Caitlin Clark plays, home or the road?
What?
15,300.
Wow.
Okay.
Lexie Hull's career was on the edge of vanishing before it truly began. The 6th overall pick in the 2022 WNBA Draft arrived in Indiana with the kind of pedigree that typically comes with expectations of stardom. A Stanford champion, a relentless competitor, and a player praised for her IQ as much as her grit, Hull was supposed to be a cornerstone for the Indiana Fever's rebuild. Instead, when the 2024 season tipped off, she found herself relegated to the far end of the bench, watching. From the shadows, while others leapfrogged her in the rotation, the whispers were growing louder. Was Lexie Hull ever going to fulfill her promise, or was she destined to become another draft bust forgotten in the shuffle of professional basketball? The situation was dire. Under former coach Christie's sides, Hull's playing time evaporated. Each game ended with her draped in a towel instead of making an impact on the floor.
Was a winner, and tonight the Atlanta Dream set the record for the biggest crowd to watch a WNBA game.
For a player whose life revolved around basketball from the very beginning, it was a cruel twist of fate. Hull had grown up in a fiercely competitive household where basketball wasn't just a pastime, it was a language spoken across generations. Her father had played collegiately, her grandfather before him, and alongside her twin sister, she had battled her way through gyms across the country. Yet here she was, watching minutes slip away, wondering if the league she had dreamed about, since childhood was already moving on without her, the Fever themselves were sinking. Their record out of the gate was abysmal, starting the year at 1 win and 8 losses, a stumble so bad it left fans begging for answers. The headlines were brutal, criticizing everything from rotations to defensive breakdowns to a complete lack of chemistry. The locker room carried the weight of that failure, and for someone like Hull, barely able to crack the rotation,
And we're never going to advance as a species, and we're never, if he keeps having that type of attitude.
It was both a professional and personal storm. She admitted later that it was one of the hardest stretches of her career, a moment where trusting the process was easier said than done. Every player in the league was a former star in high school and college, and every opponent had years of experience. Cracking through that barrier was proving far harder than she had ever imagined. But then came the earthquake. Caitlin Clark entered the league, and nothing was the same again. Clark wasn't just another rookie. She was a once-in-a-generation phenomenon, a player who carried gravity with every step, whose game pulled arenas to their feet and defenders into impossible positions. From the moment she walked into Indiana, the Fever were no longer a punchline. They were must-see basketball. Clark brought with her an electricity that rewired the team's entire identity, and for Lexie Hull, that arrival became a lifeline. Hull would later describe how the transformation began not in sold-out arenas, but behind closed doors in practice. Clark's competitiveness wasn't a gimmick. It was relentless. Scrimmages became battles. Mistakes were corrected immediately, excuses were cut short, and every possession mattered. If the scout team wasn't playing hard enough, Clark demanded more. If a set broke down, she pushed them to fix it. That energy was contagious, and soon every player on the roster was forced to rise with her. For Hull, it was like having a door opened that had long been sealed shut. Suddenly, every cut mattered because Clark might actually find her. Every fast break became an opportunity because Clark could sling a pass the length of the floor with pinpoint precision. She joked in interviews that at first it was startling, realizing she had to be ready at all times. But then it clicked. This was her chance. Clark's vision created scoring opportunities Hull had never seen before, and her confidence began to rise with every made shot, every smart cut, every defensive stand that led to transition offense. What Clark gave Hull went beyond touches. She gave her belief. In those early games, Hull admitted she wasn't sure if her chance would ever come, but Clark's presence changed the calculus. Playing alongside Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston meant that defenses could no longer key in on her. If they did, someone else would make them pay. If they didn't, Hull had to be ready to deliver. That balance, that redistribution of defensive attention, allowed Hull to finally showcase the player she always believed she could be. By mid-season, Hull wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Her cuts became sharper, her jumper more reliable, and her minutes more impactful. Coaches began trusting her in bigger moments, and fans began recognizing her as a clutch piece in the Fever's arsenal. In interviews, Hull said it plainly. She was proud of herself for staying the course, for keeping faith in the work when the minutes weren't there. When the opportunity finally arrived, she was ready. That readiness was tested during the Olympics. Break, when the Fever had a rare month of practice without games. The coaching staff began posting shooting percentages after every practice. 2s, 3s, scrimmages, drills, forcing accountability and shining a spotlight on who was improving. For Hull, those numbers became fuel. She could see her progress, in black and white, and it confirmed that the grind in the dark was finally paying dividends. By the second half of the season, her efficiency spiked, her confidence soared, and she was no longer a forgotten name at the end of the bench. But this wasn't just about one player finding her stride. It was about an entire franchise redefining itself. Indiana, long trapped in mediocrity, was suddenly selling out arenas. Road games began to feel like home games, packed with fans eager to see Clark, Boston Mitchell, and now Hull bring energy to the court. Social media flooded with highlights, praise, and renewed passion for a team that just months earlier had been the subject of ridicule. Hull described the feeling as surreal, recalling moments where simple trips to the grocery store turned into fan interactions. That kind of visibility, she admitted, was both thrilling and overwhelming, but it also underscored the power of what they were building. Of course, fame came with its own pressures. Hull acknowledged the downside of social media, the flood of criticism after every loss, and the mental toll of constantly being under the microscope. She confessed that while players tell themselves not to read the comments, everyone does. The key, she explained, was having a support system strong enough to keep her centered, reminding her of the positives even when the noise online felt suffocating. That, too, was part of the team's growth. The Fever weren't just a collection of individuals. They became a family, a locker room that leaned on each other when the outside world grew too loud, and that culture shift mattered. Instead of fracturing under pressure, the Fever found unity. Instead of pointing fingers, they held each other accountable. Hull highlighted that even during the darkest stretches, they never turned on one another. That resilience, that refusal to fracture, was what allowed them to weather the storm and find their rhythm. It was also what made their resurgence so compelling to fans. Indiana wasn't just winning games, they were winning hearts. For Hull, this turnaround was more than a professional revival. It was personal redemption. 2 years of frustration, of questions about her role, of doubts about her ceiling, all gave way to a season where she finally proved she belonged. And she was the first to admit that without Caitlin Clark, the story may have turned out very differently. Clark wasn't just a star scorer. She was a force multiplier who elevated everyone around her. Her competitiveness, her leadership, and her unselfish playmaking changed the course of Hull's career and redefined the trajectory of the Indiana Fever. As Hull put it herself, playing with Clark was a reminder that she wasn't just cutting to cut. She was cutting with the possibility of making a real play. That mindset shift was everything. Suddenly, she wasn't just filling space on the floor, she was part of a system that worked, one where every player's effort mattered. And for someone who had nearly been written off, that validation was priceless. The Fever's rise is more than a feel-good story. It's a lesson in resilience, belief, and the power of culture.